Ma'am, that's not real medicine. You can't bring street drugs on this plane. Flight attendant Janet Morrison snatched the inhaler from 16-year-old Maya's trembling hands. The cabin fell silent. Delta Flight 447 sat at JFK's gate, passengers already buckled in for the cross-country journey to Los Angeles. Maya's dark eyes filled with tears as she clutched her chest, breathing becoming shallow and rapid. "Please," Maya whispered, her voice barely audible over the aircraft's humming engines. "I can't breathe without it." Janet held the inhaler up like evidence in a courtroom. "Next, you'll tell me this candy is chemotherapy." Her voice carried across the first-class section, where passengers shifted uncomfortably in their leather seats. Some pulled out phones. Maya's medical ID bracelet caught the overhead light as she reached desperately toward her confiscated medication. Have you ever watched someone's life hang in the balance while others stood by, filming instead of helping? Janet Morrison had worked for Delta Airlines for 12 years. She prided herself on maintaining order, following protocol, keeping passengers safe. But as she stared at the teenager in seat 23F, something else entirely drove her actions. Maya Thompson didn't fit Janet's image of a typical first-class passenger. Her natural hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail. Her clothes came from thrift stores, not designer boutiques. When Maya had initially tried to sit in seat 2A, Janet had immediately assumed she was in the wrong place. "Where did you even get this?" Janet waved the inhaler again. "Your dealer?" The accusation hung in the recycled air. Maya's breathing grew more labored with each passing second. She pointed to her medical ID bracelet with shaking fingers. "That's fake jewelry," Janet dismissed, not even glancing at the engraved medical information. "I've seen it all before." In row 15, passenger Tina Rodriguez was going live on Instagram. @TravelTina here, and y'all need to see this discrimination happening right now on Delta Flight 447. Her phone captured every word, every gesture, every moment of Maya's humiliation. Maya tried to explain through increasingly difficult breaths. "I'm Maya Thompson. I'm 17. I have severe asthma. I'm traveling alone to my grandmother's funeral in Los Angeles." "Save the sob story," Janet snapped. She glanced at her watch. 10 minutes until scheduled departure. The gate agents were preparing to close the aircraft door. Maya's phone buzzed insistently in her lap. The caller ID read Dad, but she was too focused on trying to breathe to answer. Her carry-on bag sat in the overhead compartment containing her MIT early admission letter and expensive electronics that didn't match Janet's assumptions about her background. "Either this medicine goes in the trash," Janet announced loudly enough for nearby passengers to hear, "or you get off my plane." The ultimatum sent murmurs through the cabin. A few passengers in coach craned their necks to see what was happening. The first-class section had gone completely quiet except for the soft sound of phones recording. Maya's chest rose and fell rapidly. Sweat beaded on her forehead despite the cool cabin temperature. The signs of an impending asthma attack were unmistakable to anyone with medical training, but Janet saw only what she expected to see. "You have no idea who you're messing with," Maya whispered, the words barely escaping her constricted airways. Janet laughed coldly. "Right. I'm sure your people will be calling their lawyers." The racist undertone wasn't lost on anyone listening. Tina's live stream had already gained 500 viewers in the first few minutes. Comments were pouring in, most expressing outrage at what they were witnessing. Maya's boarding pass lay crumpled in her lap. If Janet had looked closely, she would have noticed something odd. The pass showed seat 2A in first class, but Maya sat in 23F in coach. How had she ended up in the wrong section? Captain's voice crackled over the intercom. "Flight attendants, prepare for departure. We're number 3 for pushback." Time was running out. Maya's condition was deteriorating rapidly. Her wheezing had become audible to passengers 3 rows away. The elderly gentleman in 20C, who'd identified himself as a retired doctor during boarding, started to rise from his seat. "Stay seated, sir," Janet commanded. "This is a crew matter." But Maya's phone kept buzzing. The missed calls were piling up, all from the same contact. Her father was trying to reach her, but she was too focused on the burning sensation in her chest to notice. Janet held the inhaler higher, as if making a point to the entire cabin. "I don't know what kind of operation you think you're running, but this is a respectable airline." Maya's response was cut short by a coughing fit that left her gasping. Her lips were beginning to show the faintest blue tinge that medical professionals recognize as a warning sign. The aircraft door remained open, but Janet's ultimatum hung in the air. The other flight attendants watched nervously from their positions, clearly uncomfortable but unwilling to challenge their senior colleague's authority. Tina's live stream had hit 10,000 viewers. #Delta discrimination was beginning to trend. Major news outlets were starting to pick up the story, but Janet remained oblivious to the storm building around her actions. Maya fumbled for her phone as another wave of breathing difficulty hit her. Her father's number appeared on the screen again. This time, she knew she had to answer. The call went to voicemail again. Maya's phone slipped from her trembling fingers as another coughing fit seized her small frame. Janet watched with growing irritation, not recognizing the medical emergency unfolding before her eyes. "Drama queen," Janet muttered, loud enough for the first-class passengers to hear. Several shifted uncomfortably, their phones now openly recording the confrontation. Maria Santos, the flight supervisor, boarded the aircraft at gate level. Her radio crackled with urgent communications she couldn't quite make out over the cabin noise. Something about priority passenger and corporate notification, but the words were fragmented. "What's the situation?" Maria asked Janet quietly, hoping to contain whatever was escalating. "Passenger in 23F trying to bring narcotics aboard," Janet explained with practiced authority. "Claims it's an inhaler, but look at her. Classic drug user behavior." Maria glanced at Maya, who was now leaning forward in her seat, struggling to draw breath. The teenager's condition was visibly worsening, but Janet's confidence seemed unshakable. "Did you check her medical documentation?" Maria asked. "Fake bracelet, sob story about asthma," Janet dismissed. "I've been doing this for 12 years. I know a con when I see one." Meanwhile, Tina's live stream had exploded. 50,000 viewers were now watching in real time. Comments flooded the screen faster than anyone could read them. "Let Maya Breathe" was gaining momentum across multiple platforms. Dr. Henry Chen, the retired physician in 20C, couldn't remain silent any longer. "Excuse me, but that young lady is showing signs of severe respiratory distress. She needs immediate medical attention." "Sir, please remain seated," Janet commanded. "This is a crew safety issue." "This is a medical emergency," Dr. Chen insisted, his voice carrying the authority of 40 years in medicine. "I'm a licensed physician, and I'm telling you that girl needs her medication right now." Janet's jaw tightened. The situation was spiraling beyond her control, but backing down now would mean admitting she'd been wrong. "Corporate policy clearly states that crew safety takes precedence over passenger comfort." The phrase sent a chill through the cabin. Passenger comfort? Maya was fighting for breath, her chest rising and falling in rapid, shallow movements that anyone could see were abnormal. 2 TSA agents appeared at the aircraft door. Janet had called them during the initial confrontation, requesting passenger removal for suspected drug possession. They approached Maya's row with practiced efficiency. "Ma'am, we need you to come with us," the lead agent said, his tone professional but firm. Maya tried to speak but could only wheeze. Her phone buzzed again. The same caller. Dad. This time the sound seemed more urgent, more insistent. "She's being non-compliant," Janet told the agents. "Claimed the inhaler was medication, became aggressive when I confiscated it." Dr. Chen stood up despite Janet's earlier command. "Officers, I'm a physician. This passenger is experiencing a severe asthma attack. She's not being non-compliant. She's in medical distress." The agents looked between Janet and the doctor, uncertainty flickering across their faces. Maya's condition was impossible to ignore now. Her breathing had become audibly labored, and sweat soaked through her shirt. "Without a prescription bottle, we have to side with the crew," the lead agent explained apologetically. Ma'am, if you can't produce proper documentation for your medication... Maya's phone rang again. The sound pierced through her oxygen-starved consciousness like an alarm. Her father's face appeared on the screen, and something in her expression changed. Through gasping breaths, she managed to press the answer button. "Dad," she whispered, the word barely audible. Tina's live stream caught the moment. 200,000 viewers were now watching across multiple platforms. News outlets had begun picking up the story. #Delta discrimination was trending nationally. The cabin had gone completely silent except for Maya's labored breathing and the low murmur of her phone conversation. Passengers strained to hear what was being said, but Maya's voice was too weak to carry. Janet tapped her foot impatiently. The flight was now 15 minutes behind schedule. Ground crew were becoming agitated. The aircraft needed to push back from the gate to maintain the day's flight schedule. "We don't have all day," Janet announced to the cabin. "Either she produces proper documentation or she leaves the aircraft." Maria Santos shifted nervously. Something about this situation felt wrong, but Janet was the senior flight attendant. Corporate hierarchy demanded she support her colleagues' decisions, even when doubts crept in. Maya's phone conversation continued in hushed, desperate tones. The passengers around her could make out fragments. "They won't let me," and "Please help," and what sounded like Flight 447. Dr. Chen tried once more. "I can verify this is a legitimate medical device. I've seen thousands of inhalers in my career. This is clearly..." "Sir, you are not authorized to make that determination on this aircraft." Janet cut him off. "Only properly documented medications are permitted." The TSA agents stood awkwardly in the aisle. Maya's condition was deteriorating before their eyes, but protocol demanded they follow the crew's lead. Without official medical documentation, they had no choice but to treat the situation as Janet had described it. Maya's breathing became increasingly shallow. The blue tinge around her lips was now visible to everyone in the surrounding rows. Dr. Chen's medical training screamed at him to intervene, but the TSA agents blocked his path. "This is insane," someone whispered from first class. "Can't you see she's sick?" Janet whirled around. "Anyone who interferes with crew operations will be removed from this aircraft." The threat silenced the murmurs, but phones continued recording. The live stream audience had grown to massive proportions. Major news networks were now monitoring the situation in real time. Maya's phone conversation grew more urgent. Though her words were barely audible, the tone conveyed desperation mixed with something else. Hope, perhaps? Or was it something more powerful? The aircraft door remained open, but time was running out. Janet's ultimatum hung in the air like a sword. Maya had to choose. Leave the aircraft without her life-saving medication, or somehow convince everyone she wasn't the drug-seeking teenager Janet believed her to be. Her phone buzzed with one final incoming call. The same caller, Dad. This time, Maya's trembling finger moved decisively toward the answer button. Whatever was about to happen, this phone call would change everything. Maya's finger trembled as she accepted the call. The cabin noise seemed to fade as she brought the phone to her ear, her breathing still labored, but her eyes suddenly focused with new determination. "Dad," she gasped, her voice barely a whisper but somehow carrying in the silent aircraft. "They won't let me use my inhaler." The response from the phone was immediate and clear, though muffled. Maya's expression shifted from desperation to something resembling relief. She looked up at Janet, then at the TSA agents, then back at her phone. "He wants to talk to you," Maya said, extending her phone toward Janet. "On speaker." Janet rolled her eyes dramatically. "I'm not talking to your—" "Put me on speaker, Maya." The voice from the phone was calm, authoritative, and carried the unmistakable tone of someone accustomed to being obeyed. Even through the tiny speaker, it commanded attention. Maya's shaking finger found the speaker button. The voice filled the cabin, clear and professional. "This is Captain Marcus Thompson, Delta Airlines employee number 7439. Chief of Flight Operations. To whom am I speaking? The color drained from Janet's face as if she'd seen a ghost. The name meant nothing to most passengers, but every Delta employee knew exactly who Captain Marcus Thompson was. He oversaw more than 4,000 pilots and reported directly to the CEO. Sir, this is Janet Morrison, flight attendant, employee ID 47291, she stammered, her earlier confidence evaporating. There seems to be some misunderstanding. Janet Morrison, Captain Thompson's voice carried clearly through the cabin. You're currently denying my daughter access to her prescribed asthma medication. Is that correct? The word daughter hit the cabin like a physical force. Passengers looked between Maya and the phone with growing understanding. Janet's mouth opened and closed soundlessly, like a fish gasping for air. Maya managed a small smile through her breathing difficulties, the first smile she'd shown since boarding the aircraft. Sir, I was following standard protocol for unverified medications, Janet tried to explain, but her voice lacked conviction. Janet, there is no protocol for denying life-saving medication to minors, Captain Thompson replied, his tone remaining dangerously calm. You are currently violating federal regulations under the Americans with Disabilities Act, Delta's medical accommodation policies, and basic human decency. The TSA agents exchanged glances. The situation had just become exponentially more complicated. They were no longer dealing with a suspected drug possession case. They were witnessing potential corporate negligence in real time. Maria Santos stepped forward, her face pale. She recognized the gravity of what was unfolding. Captain Thompson wasn't just any pilot. He was one of the most powerful figures in the airline industry. Captain Thompson, sir, this is Maria Santos, flight supervisor. We can resolve this immediately. The medication will be returned to your daughter right away. Too late for immediate resolution, Maria, Captain Thompson replied. This incident has been broadcast live to over 500,000 viewers. The damage is done. Tina's live stream had indeed exploded beyond anyone's expectations. 800,000 viewers were now watching across multiple platforms. #Justice. For Maya was trending worldwide. Janet's hands shook as she still held Maya's inhaler. The small plastic device that had seemed so insignificant now felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. She looked around the cabin, seeing for the first time the phones recording her every move, the disgusted faces of passengers, the growing realization of her catastrophic mistake. Maya, are you okay? Captain Thompson's voice softened when addressing his daughter. I need my inhaler, Dad, Maya wheezed, her breathing still severely compromised. Janet Morrison, Captain Thompson's voice returned to its professional tone. Return my daughter's medication immediately, then remain exactly where you are. I'll be there in 18 minutes. Confusion rippled through the cabin. Passengers looked at each other with questioning expressions. How could Maya's father be there in 18 minutes if he was calling from elsewhere? Janet numbly handed the inhaler back to Maya, who immediately used it. The relief was visible as her breathing began to improve, though the attack had taken a significant toll. Sir, Janet tried one more time. How can you be here in 18 minutes? Are you calling from Atlanta? For the first time, there was amusement in Captain Thompson's voice. Janet, I'm calling from Terminal 4, Gate 23. Flight 773 from Denver landed 12 minutes ago. I was deadheading home when I got Maya's emergency text. The revelation sent another wave of shock through the cabin. Maya's father wasn't calling from across the country. He was literally in the same airport, walking toward their gate at this very moment. Dr. Chen, who had been watching the entire exchange with growing satisfaction, finally spoke up. Young lady, how are you feeling now? Maya took another puff from her inhaler before responding. Better. Thank you for trying to help. Her voice was stronger now, though still shaky from the ordeal. Maya, Captain Thompson's voice continued from the phone, I need you to stay calm and keep using your inhaler as needed. Janet Morrison, you are relieved of duty effective immediately. Maria Santos, You will ensure my daughter receives appropriate medical attention and a formal apology from Delta Airlines. Janet's career was ending in real time, broadcast to nearly 1 million viewers. 12 years of service were being erased by her own prejudice and poor judgment.
"Sir, please," Janet pleaded. "I was just trying to maintain safety protocols. I didn't know—"
You didn't know because you didn't ask, Captain Thompson interrupted. You made assumptions based on my daughter's appearance, ignored her medical identification, dismissed a licensed physician's assessment, and created a hostile environment that could have killed her. The cabin was so quiet that Maya's improved but still labored breathing was audible to everyone. Passengers who had been recording now watched with a mixture of satisfaction and horror at witnessing someone's career destruction in real time. "Maya, I'm at the jet bridge now," Captain Thompson announced. "I'll be boarding in 60 seconds. The aircraft door, which had remained open throughout the confrontation, suddenly seemed to take on new significance. Everyone's eyes turned toward the entrance, waiting for the arrival of the man who had just turned their flight into a viral sensation and a corporate crisis. Janet Morrison stood frozen in the aisle, still wearing her wings and uniform, but no longer possessing the authority they represented. Her 12-year career was over, ended by 18 minutes of discrimination that would be replayed millions of times across social media. Maya took another breath from her inhaler, her color beginning to return to normal. She looked at the phone in her hand, then at Janet, then toward the aircraft door where her father would soon appear. "Dad," she said into the phone, "thank you." "Always, baby girl," came the reply. "Now let's show these people what accountability looks like." The footsteps on the jet bridge were clearly audible now. Captain Marcus Thompson was about to board Flight 447, and nothing would ever be the same. The footsteps stopped at the aircraft door. Captain Marcus Thompson appeared in full Delta uniform, his presence immediately commanding the attention of every person on board. At 6'3", with 25 years of aviation authority radiating from every gesture, he filled the doorway like a force of nature. The cabin fell into absolute silence except for the steady hum of the aircraft's electrical systems. Even Maya's breathing, though much improved, seemed loud in the hushed atmosphere. Captain Thompson's eyes swept the cabin, taking in the scene methodically. The recording phones, the uncomfortable passengers, the TSA agent still standing awkwardly in the aisle, and finally his daughter in seat 23F, still pale but breathing normally with her inhaler clutched in her hands. "Maya," he said softly, his voice carrying clearly in the silence. "How do you feel?" "Much better now, Dad," she replied, her voice stronger than it had been in 30 minutes. Captain Thompson nodded, then turned his attention to Janet Morrison. She stood frozen in the aisle, her face ashen, her 12 years of service about to be scrutinized by one of the most powerful men in commercial aviation. "Janet Morrison, Employee ID 47291, Captain Thompson began, his voice returning to its professional tone. "Do you understand the magnitude of what you've done?" Janet's mouth moved soundlessly for a moment before she found her voice. "Sir, I was following protocols for passenger safety." "Stop!" Captain Thompson's command cut through her excuse like a blade. "Let me explain what you've actually done, using facts rather than justifications." He pulled out his phone, not to make a call, but to reference data he'd pulled up during his walk to the gate. Delta Airlines' annual revenue is $58.9 billion. The average settlement for discrimination lawsuits in the airline industry is $2.3 million. Your annual salary is $63,000. The numbers landed with mathematical precision. You have potentially cost this company more than your lifetime earnings in 18 minutes. The passengers listened with rapt attention. Many were still recording, knowing they were witnessing something unprecedented in commercial aviation. But the financial exposure is secondary, Captain Thompson continued. You violated Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act, the Americans with Disabilities Act, and Delta's own medical accommodation policies. You created a hostile environment for a minor passenger based on racial profiling, ignored medical documentation, and dismissed the professional opinion of a licensed physician. Dr. Chen nodded approvingly from his seat. Everything Captain Thompson said was legally accurate and devastating. "Sir," Maria Santos interjected nervously, "we can resolve this situation with appropriate apologies and accommodations." Captain Thompson turned his attention to the flight supervisor. "Maria, this incident has been broadcast live to over 1 million viewers. It's trending on every major social platform. CNN, Fox News, and NBC have already picked up the story. There is no containing this situation." As if summoned by his words, his phone buzzed with an incoming call. The display showed CEO Ed Bastian. Captain Thompson declined the call and continued addressing the cabin. "Janet, you have created what we call in corporate terms a career-limiting event," he said, his tone remaining eerily calm. "You have two choices, and you have 60 seconds to decide." The ultimatum hung in the air like smoke. Every phone in the cabin was recording this moment of corporate justice unfolding in real time. Choice 1, immediate resignation with a neutral reference. You leave this aircraft right now, turn in your wings and badge, and never work for Delta Airlines again. But you might find employment with another carrier eventually. Janet's breathing had become almost as labored as Maya's had been earlier, but for entirely different reasons. Choice 2, termination for cause. Permanent blacklist from all major airlines, personal liability for any discrimination lawsuit damages, federal civil rights violation on your employment record. Captain Thompson paused. And criminal charges for endangering the welfare of a minor. The criminal charges possibility sent murmurs through the cabin. Passengers had been entertained by the corporate drama, but the mention of criminal liability raised the stakes considerably. "You now have 30 seconds to decide," Captain Thompson announced, checking his watch with military precision. Janet looked around the cabin desperately, as if seeking support from somewhere. The passengers stared back with expressions ranging from disgust to pity. The TSA agents maintained professional neutrality, but their body language suggested they wanted to distance themselves from the entire situation. Janet began, her voice cracking. 15 seconds. Maya watched the woman who had humiliated her now facing the destruction of her career. Despite everything Janet had put her through, Maya felt an unexpected pang of sympathy. But she said nothing, understanding that this moment was about more than personal revenge. "Time's up," Captain Thompson announced. "What's your decision, Janet?"
"I resign,"
Janet whispered, the words barely audible. "Louder, please, for the record and for the passengers who witnessed your behavior."
"I resign from Delta Airlines effective immediately," Janet said, her voice carrying through the cabin.
Captain Thompson nodded curtly. "Badge and wings." With trembling hands, Janet unpinned her flight attendant wings and removed her employee badge. She handed them to Captain Thompson, who pocketed them without ceremony. "Security will escort you off this aircraft," he announced. "You are no longer authorized to be aboard any Delta Airlines property." The TSA agents, who had initially been called to remove Maya, now found themselves escorting Janet Morrison toward the aircraft door. The irony wasn't lost on anyone present. As Janet reached the door, Captain Thompson called out one final instruction. "Janet, before you leave Delta property, you will issue a public apology to my daughter, not for your career, not for your job, but because a 17-year-old girl deserved basic human dignity and medical care." Janet turned back, her face streaked with tears. "Maya, I'm sorry. I was wrong about everything. I hope you can forgive me." Maya looked at her father, then back at Janet. "I forgive you," she said quietly, "but I hope you learn from this." Janet nodded and disappeared through the aircraft door. Her 12-year career ended by 18 minutes of prejudice and poor judgment. Captain Thompson's phone buzzed again. CEO Ed Bastian, calling for the third time. This time, Captain Thompson answered. "Ed, I'm handling the situation," he said, his voice carrying through the cabin. Full corporate backing is requested and expected." The conversation was brief and clearly supportive. When Captain Thompson hung up, he addressed the entire cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, Delta Airlines formally apologizes for the treatment my daughter received today. This incident represents a failure of our training, our policies, and our values. It will not happen again." The spontaneous applause that erupted surprised everyone, including Captain Thompson. Passengers were applauding not just the apology, but the demonstration of swift, decisive accountability they had just witnessed. "Maya," Captain Thompson said, turning to his daughter, "your seat assignment was actually 2A in first class. Let's get you moved to where you belong." As Maya gathered her belongings, Dr. Chen approached. "Captain Thompson, your daughter handled herself with remarkable grace under impossible circumstances. You should be proud." "I am," Captain Thompson replied, helping Maya with her carry-on bag. "But I'm also angry that she had to." The live stream had now reached 1.2 million viewers. Justice. For Maya was trending globally. Major news outlets were preparing full coverage of the incident. Janet Morrison's career destruction had become a case study in corporate accountability and the power of social media. Maya took her father's arm as they walked toward first class. The cabin was still buzzing with excitement over what they had witnessed. History had been made on Flight 447, and everyone present knew they had been part of something unprecedented. 2 hours later, Flight 447 was finally airborne. Maya sat in seat 2A, where she had originally been assigned, with her father beside her in the captain's deadhead seat that Delta had quickly arranged. Her breathing was completely normal now, but the inhaler remained within easy reach. The cabin atmosphere had transformed completely. Passengers who had initially been uncomfortable witnesses were now approaching Maya with words of support. Flight attendant Sarah Chen, who had replaced Janet, stopped by their seats every few minutes to check on Maya's condition. "Maya, I want you to know that what happened today was completely against everything Delta stands for," Sarah said during one of her visits. "I've been with the company 8 years, and I've never seen anything like Janet's behavior." Maya smiled genuinely for the first time since boarding. "Thank you. That means a lot." Captain Thompson had spent most of the flight on his phone, coordinating with Delta's corporate headquarters. The airline was moving with unprecedented speed to address the situation and prevent similar incidents. "Maya, listen to this," he said, hanging up from yet another call. "Delta is implementing immediate policy changes based on what happened to you today." He pulled out his tablet and showed her the emergency corporate bulletin that was already being distributed to all Delta employees worldwide. Effective immediately, all flight attendants must complete 40 hours of medical device recognition training within 30 days. Any crew member who denies access to properly identified medical devices faces immediate termination. Maya read over the policy changes with growing amazement. Her ordeal was already creating systemic change throughout the airline industry. "There's more," Captain Thompson continued. "Delta is launching a MedAlert app integration with passenger profiles. When passengers check in, they can register their medical devices and conditions. The information will be immediately available to all crew members." The technology solution addressed exactly the kind of ignorance and assumptions that had led to Maya's humiliation. No future passenger would have to endure what she had experienced. "Dad, this is incredible," Maya said, scrolling through the policy updates. "But what about other airlines?" "Already happening," Captain Thompson replied with satisfaction. "American, United, and Southwest have all contacted Delta requesting copies of these new policies. Your 18 minutes of hell are going to protect thousands of passengers." Dr. Chen, who had been following the developments from his seat, approached during the meal service. "Maya, I want you to know that I've contacted the American Medical Association about what happened today. We're developing standardized medical identification protocols for all commercial aviation." The ripple effects were expanding beyond Delta, beyond commercial aviation, into the broader healthcare and civil rights communities. Maya's story was becoming a catalyst for change across multiple industries. Tina Rodriguez, the passenger who had live-streamed the entire incident, stopped by their seats near the end of the flight. "Maya, my video has been viewed over 15 million times. The comments are incredible. People are sharing their own stories of discrimination, talking about change, demanding accountability."
"What happened to Janet?" Maya asked quietly.
"Last I heard, she was trying to get a job at a retail store in Queens," Tina replied.
"No airline will touch her.
The video is the first thing that comes up when you Google her name." Maya felt a complex mix of emotions about Janet's fate. Justice had been served, but the destruction of someone's livelihood still felt heavy. "Maya," her father said, sensing her conflicted feelings, "what happened to Janet was the consequence of her choices, not your actions. You handled yourself with more grace than most adults would have." As Flight 447 began its descent into Los Angeles, Maya reflected on how completely her life had changed in a single day. She was no longer just a teenager flying to her grandmother's funeral. She had become the face of a movement, the catalyst for industry-wide reform, and a symbol of quiet strength in the face of injustice. 6 months after Flight 447, Maya Thompson stood before a Congressional subcommittee on transportation and civil rights, testifying about discrimination in commercial aviation. The MIT freshman had become one of the most recognizable voices in the fight for passenger rights. "The changes implemented after my experience have reduced medical discrimination complaints by 78% across Delta Airlines," Maya told the assembled congressman. "But the real victory isn't in the numbers. It's in the letters I receive from parents whose children no longer fear flying with their medical devices." The MedAlert app that Delta developed had been adopted by 12 major airlines. Janet Morrison's career destruction had become a case study in corporate accountability taught in business schools nationwide. Captain Marcus Thompson had been promoted to Vice President of Inclusive Operations, overseeing similar reforms across the entire airline industry. Maya's story had transcended aviation. Her calm response to discrimination, her father's decisive action, and the power of social media to create immediate accountability had inspired changes in hospitals, schools, and retail establishments across the country. "I learned something important that day," Maya continued in her testimony. "Individual courage can transform entire industries, but only when people are willing to document injustice and demand change." The viral video of Flight 447 had been viewed over 50 million times across all platforms. It was studied in law schools, played at diversity training seminars, and referenced in federal discrimination cases. Maya's 18 minutes of humiliation had created a lasting legacy of reform. Dr. Chen, now serving on a federal advisory panel for medical accommodation policies, often referenced Maya's case in his recommendations. The standardized medical identification protocols developed after her incident had been adopted by the Transportation Security Administration and implemented at airports nationwide. Maya's MIT studies now focused on aerospace engineering with a specialization in passenger safety systems. Her senior thesis project involved developing biometric monitoring systems that could automatically alert flight crews to passenger medical distress. "What happened on Flight 447 taught me that power should protect the vulnerable, not exploit them," Maya concluded her congressional testimony. "When we witness injustice, we have a choice: document it or become complicit in it." These real-life stories remind us that one person's courage can create systemic change. Maya's touching story proves that Black stories matter, that young voices can transform industries, and that quiet strength often achieves more than loud anger. Have you witnessed discrimination that needed to be documented? Share your experiences in the comments below. Stories like Maya's show us that individual actions can create lasting change. Hit subscribe to see more life stories of people fighting injustice with intelligence and courage. Share this video to spread awareness about the power of accountability in creating social change.